Welcome everyone to one more trial and learning adventure. Hopefully this will go better than it did on Tuesday because it was pandemonium. This is a session to sort of review the content for the first week and answer questions that people have. Though I have put together, I want to do a rather well-oriented agenda so that when the video is done, I can actually put markers in it so that people can go and watch the portion of the video that they would prefer to watch rather than watching all of it. And the session is only going to be an hour as opposed to 90 minutes. YouTube spent 7 hours processing Tuesday's video. And I will add some additional sessions next week, and I will add as many sessions as I need to satisfy the interactions that we need to have. So I want to do 15 minutes of architecture Q&A. Then I want to spend 10 minutes sort of reviewing my intent for the content, and then we'll spend 35 minutes doing a Q&A session about the content itself. So in terms of, this is the architecture Q&A session, and I know I'm already 4 minutes late, so what else is new? So this is the architecture that you ended up in. Are there questions that you have about the architecture itself, the nature of the interactions, how you get around what's what? So you have one on the list?
Gene, this is Greg. Could you just give us a very quick overview of the different sections of the screen?
Okay, when you first come into Kumu, you end up with the map on the right-hand side, and the left-hand panel is always referred to as the profile. By default, what you have is a profile of the map itself, though that profile changes depending upon what it is that you've selected. The intent is to provide all of the major components that are appropriate for dealing or interacting with the content accessible from here, and the map itself is a live evolving entity at the moment, which is why the updates piece is here, because there are constantly new things being added based upon the feedback and comments from the participants and things that come to mind that I think need to be there to make it more meaningful for those of you who are interacting with it. The way that it's meant to be used is that for the particular segment or the week that we're working on, if you come here and you click on it, it takes you to the initial loop profile for that section of content. You come down here and you do a focus, and what it then shows you is just that set of content for that particular segment of the program. This video, Navigating the Environment, if you haven't watched it, I recommend that you watch it. Watch it more than once if needs be, because it will show you all of the ins and outs of navigating around in this environment. So now there's some questions?
I don't see any additional questions at this time.
Okay, well, I didn't realize that the environment was quite that intuitive, but if it is, I'm sure that Jeff will be delighted to hear that.
So, Gene, would you do me a favor? This is Greg. Would you just click on one of those nodes or whatever they're called and just show us what's in there?
Okay. The map is made up of 3 types of things. There are elements, there are connections, and there are links, right? And some of this looks a little bit different now as I'm displaying it, because I'm actually in edit mode, so that you only have a couple of buttons across the top, and you won't see all this background trash in here that's not relevant because there's nothing in them. So that's the profile for this loop, and they call them loops because they intended them to be used to develop causal loop diagrams in Kumu. This is the element. When you click on an element, it shows you the description of or provides you with the content that I thought meaningful for that piece. And the intent is that you start at green and you work through the sequence until you get to red, and then you stop. And the elements that are on dashed lines are considered optional. That's a change that was just made the other day because people said, well, I'm not sure which ones I really ought to pay attention to or not. And for every element that is part of the content for the week, there is a video and a model, or just a model or something, so that, and all of the videos are now in light boxes so that they show inside of Kumu as opposed to taking you to YouTube to watch the video. And all of the videos are done in HD so that once you start it, if needs be, you can adjust it to get to 720.
Excellent. So, Gene, we do have some questions that came in. Okay. The first one is that the Web of Wonder does not look like the one that was in the webinar, the recorded webinar. Is that okay?
Well, no. Kumu has its own algorithms for how it arranges things, so it won't be identical. It won't appear identical because every time it repositions based upon a whole bunch of things, some that you can see and some that you can't. And sometimes it gets contorted, and if you press the B key, it goes ahead and sort of bumps it around and it reorients itself.
Excellent. But we should always start with green, work our way through, and end at red, correct?
Yes, though they've told me that those are meaningless for someone who's colorblind.
Right. The other question that came up, and this is the questioner has it as a little bit off topic, is you said something about putting Hawaii quality of life Kumu map up somewhere so it's accessible. Where would I get this?
There it is. So if you, in other words, the content for week 10 is actually learning how to develop maps in Kumu, and on the first one, the entry point, I put that map right here, how Hawaii quality of life. And
great.
And the things that are in Kumu, in other words, if you look, this is a link to Kumu. If you click this link, it will replace the project that you're in, so that I probably have to go back and fix these so that it does new tabs automatically as opposed to replacing the existing context, so that it does this automatically and goes to a new tab.
Excellent. Gene, another question came up. So someone is working their way around from the green start to the red finish. They're somewhere in the middle, say up at the top dot in learning, toward the top of the screen. If they needed to stop there, is there a way for them to mark their place on the map? Yes. So that they remember when they come back a couple hours later or a couple days later exactly where to pick up? Well,
there isn't a way to actually mark it on the map. Though if you look on the bottom of every profile page except the profile page for the entire map itself, there's a link down here called permalink. If you click on that and drag it up and drop it on the bookmarks bar, that is a link that points to this particular element of the map. So that if you close all of your connections to Kumu and you decided you wanted to come back, all you got to do is click on this and it will take you back to where you were.
Excellent. Another question, does this work with all major browsers, Internet Explorer, Chrome? Is there any browsers it does not work?
It does not work with IE9, and there are also some people that have run into some situations that that the developers are sorting out at the moment, so that I expect that in more instances, I mean, this page has been pushed out on a dozen emails so far. If you don't have it someplace, if you remember what systemswiki.org, and if you go down here to ST certification, it will get you to this page. And there's a section of this is compatible browsers. And if I get some more information from the developers, it will be on this page.
Excellent, thank you. If there are other questions from the group, please make sure you type them into the questions box on the right-hand side, and I will provide them to Gene.
Have I caught up?
Yep, it looks like we have no questions at this particular point in time.
Unbelievable. This is definitely not Tuesday's session. So, all right, then maybe I've caught up now. Then I would say that the second session was that I was going to spend about 10 minutes and review my thoughts or intent about the content for this segment. For those of you who have purchased Beyond Connecting the Dots, Modeling for Meaningful Results, this first segment is almost identical to what's in the book. Not because I want to, in other words, I spent a long time thinking about it and tried to come up with what I thought was a more workable approach to sort of providing an introduction to a systemic perspective without doing a lot of theory. It was more, here's a bunch of examples that you should be able to connect with and relate to, and actually provide a foundation from an experience perspective, as opposed from asking you to think about principles and concepts. There'll be some of that in the next week, but it's still not, it all fits on a half a sheet of paper. I mean, the intent has been to try and distill the essence of what systems thinking is into something that's easy for almost anyone to connect to. I mean, I tell people that I spent 35 years having people ask me what I did, and when I started to tell them, you could see their eyes glaze over, and the story running through their head was, why did I ask, and how do I get him to stop? Because it's tough to connect with it from a theory perspective. Though one day someone said to me, what do you do? And I said, we figure out how to solve problems so they stay solved and not create new ones in the process. And as a result, they said, well, tell us more. That's really interesting. And I was speechless because that had never happened before. So the idea is to do it from an experience perspective, a lot of things, hopefully, that people can connect to. It's the reason that the bird feeder model, I figured that everyone has to be able to connect with the implications of not thinking about things, or what happens when one doesn't think about the implications of our actions before we take them, and then the moose and the wolves and the forest examples, and these are not validated models. These are just things that were trumped up to show the unexpected implication, or what can result from very simple interactions that are unexpected because of the nature of interactions. And then the essence 1, 2, and 3, using a lot of pictures, a lot of examples of things to distill out 3 properties of the way things actually interact, so that there's independent growth or growth or decline, and the rate of that is independent of the quantity itself, or there is exponential growth or decline because of reinforcing feedback, or there is a structure which approaches a goal because of balancing feedback. Though the intent was to go at those situations from having a whole set of pictures that essentially represented the same thing, so that you could connect with this simple structure was representative of what was happening in all of those different pictures.
So, Gene,
yes.
We have a couple questions that have come in, but
okay.
one of the ones that I wanted to ask about is, so someone said, if you had to sum up systems thinking in a practical way for a business or an organization or someone unfamiliar with what systems thinking means, you would sum it up as solving problems in a way that keeps those problems solved and does not create new problems inadvertently, correct?
That's what I tell people. Is it absolutely correct? I don't know. It is actually the intent, and systems thinking helps us get there better than anything else I've ever found to date, and I've been looking for a very, very long time.
Okay.
Now, one has to admit that everything is not predictable. Okay, so that I look at situations and I develop models to help me understand the interactions and the implications of them. And then after I develop it, I go and explain it to somebody else, and they ask all these questions that I didn't think about. So it's an opportunity to continue to evolve the understanding of that set of interactions. And at some point, we end up sort of having exhausted all of the relevant interactions that anybody can think of, and hopefully at that point we have ferreted out what is likely to happen from doing this or not doing this, so that we're further ahead.
Excellent. So the two other questions. How does the Dig or Dig library work? Can you explain that?
Okay. It's actually called Diggo. I think it's called Diggo.
Oh, pardon me, Diggo. Okay.
It's a commercially available free or subscription product on the market, and it's meant to be a way to manage bookmarks. And there was another one I used for years, and I used this. I switched back and forth, and yesterday I think somebody asked the question, and they asked about the accessibility of this content, and I said, well, somebody's going to ask that question again, and I don't want to lose it. Now, where am I going to put it, and how am I going to? And so I said, well, let me go see if I can configure Diggo, which happens to be an HTTPS protocol, to work the same way that the YouTube videos do in light boxes, and lo and behold, it worked. So if this right here is the annotation in the Diggo library that I usually use, that's a plug-in to Chrome. And if you just go to www.diggo.com, this is where I keep all of the bookmarks. I mean, somebody mentioned the other day in a thread about Human System Dynamics Institute and Glenda, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. So that the stuff that goes by that's meaningful, I capture it, because it's easier to go back and look for it in here, because I assign it's got a title and a URL and a whole bunch of tags that I assign to it, so that I can search by. In other words, if I'm looking for Forrester, so here's a this is the YouTube video that somebody posted on one of our discussions the other day that looked really meaningful, and I've watched part of it, but I didn't want to lose it, so I stuck it in here. And though to make it easily accessible to the participants in a program, it was just as easy to configure it into Kumu, and I've asked the developers to make this window a little bit bigger so that one doesn't have to scroll back and forth over here, and we'll work on that. So you simply put in tags. There was a bunch of stuff we were doing on why nations fail in some discussion thread that we're going to. So there are all of these references that we snagged. So Diggo is a facility that any of you can go and sign up to use on the web. This is my own personal Diggo library that is now also supporting this project. Okay?
Excellent. Thank you. Going back to the map that you have up, what is the difference between Kumu and mind map or mind mapping?
Kumu is a piece of software that I searched for 14 years. And then the Moore brothers finally decided to build it and put me out of my misery. You can use it as a mind mapping facility. It was meant more to develop networks of relations because it is almost everything else that you deal with is hierarchical in nature. It starts at a point and everything fans out from the point, and you can make some other connections to it, but it's essentially hierarchical. Kumu is absolutely a network-oriented relationship mapping utility in that you can do a hierarchical diagram in it if you want to, though it doesn't have to be. You can just connect anything to anything quite easily. I mean, I've used a couple of dozen mind mapping utilities over the years, and you know, the spiderweb diagrams are wonderful to look at, but I find them extremely painful to work with. And I'm absolutely delighted and fascinated with Kumu at the moment.
Excellent. Next question, and these are going back to systems thinking as a general concept.
Okay, so are we off of me doing the content review, and are we more about me doing the 35-minute part of the content Q&A?
These do look like more content questions.
Okay, so at this point, I'll say that we're into this portion of the session. So that this will be a tag in the video. Okay, so all right, sorry, go ahead.
So the question here is, in general, is systems thinking have an assumed element of sustainability in it, by which I mean a problem that is solved should be solved in a sustainable way so that it doesn't rear its ugly head again.
It can be. In other words, if you learn to investigate things systemically as opposed to simply doing analysis, it gives you a much better understanding of what the relationship. I mean, if you listen to Ackoff says, if I can, that a thing is not the sum of its parts. It's the product of its relations. And I don't like the word product, but because it implies multiplication. It's the result of the set of interactions as opposed to just adding up the pieces. The interactions are more relevant than the pieces are. So when you begin to look at things systemically, you go beyond the typical simple cause and effect relationship to say, what are the other things that come into play here? It has been said so many times I lost track of it that for the most part, the problems that we are attempting to deal with today are the direct result of yesterday's solutions, because they were terrible solutions, because we were simply trying to make the problem go away, as opposed to figuring out how to deal with the situation in a meaningful way. And systems thinking helps us do that.
Excellent. The next question had to do with optimization. Similar type of question as the previous one, but shouldn't we be seeking to optimize our systems? Is systems thinking about optimizing, not just problem solving?
All of the references that I read that are considered to be in the know tell us to model situations, not systems. The reason being that if you model a situation, it gives you a sense of where to stop, to help you identify what's relevant and what's not. In terms of simply modeling the system, the likelihood is that you will include numerous things in the model that are irrelevant to the situation that you're trying to figure out how to deal with. What was the question? I lost myself.
So the previous question was about sustainability, an element of sustainability.
Okay.
This one is systems thinking, is there an element of optimizing the system in some way?
Well, if you build simulation models, one aspect of that set of interactions is that you can do sensitivity analysis and optimization on that set of interactions to determine, to help you understand how better to produce particular results. Does that get it? I'm not.
Well, let me ask. The person who asked about the optimization, would you just type into the questions and let me know how well that answered your question?
Okay.
While we're waiting for that response, the next one is, should we think of systems as a meta paradigm? Is it thinking about the way we think about things?
Well, you people just want to make my head hurt. As we are developing an understanding of systems thinking, we are thinking about the way we are thinking about things. Though as we develop that capability, we're then applying that way of thinking about things to particular situations. So I think the answer to that depends upon which aspect of the activity that you're paying attention to or focused on the moment. Am I trying to use what I have learned to deal with the situation, or am I trying to take what I've learned and evolve it further so that I am more capable of using what I know to address situations? I think it's single and double loop learning, I think.
We have a follow-up question specifically about something you just said, which is the person saying, should we be modeling situations and not systems? Could you expand a little bit on this?
The easy answer is no. No.
Okay.
No.
So let me just ask that. Are we modeling, so Gene, are we modeling systems or are we modeling situations? Or
Okay. All right. So sales are down. Okay. Do I go model the Salesforce organization and its operation? All right. though, because that's where the problem is. Though Ackoff continually remarked, or repeatedly remarked, that no matter where it is that the problem appears, the source of it is most likely to be somewhere else. So that if I find this, I mean, sales are down, and I start modeling the way that the sales force operates and all this stuff, is that likely to get me to realize that sales are down because my customers are unhappy because production is off and I can't deliver, and they're tired of waiting and they're ordering from somebody else. Right? So if I take the situation that I'm trying to address and continue to work and expand the awareness of what is relevant and related in terms of having an influence on that situation, right? I end up going from sales to fulfillment to production to and the reason production is off because the order fulfillment can't get the parts they need to do the production. Do I end up modeling the entire operation of the entire organization, most of which is irrelevant to the particular situation I'm trying to figure out how to address? So I mean that is a sort of an off-the-cuff thought as to why I think it makes more sense to model situations as opposed to systems. Though now we get back to the question of what is a system? I mean, whenever I'm having a discussion with someone and they say the system, my immediate response is, what does that mean? Because to understand the system, one needs to know what the elements are, what the relationships are, and the boundary that encompasses some set of elements, and that set and their interactions with the environment, which is outside of the boundary. And unless you understand what the elements are and their relationships and where the boundary is and the extent to which one is considering the interactions of that with the environment, you're sort of clueless as to what it is they mean by the system. And now where was I going? I lost my way again. Sorry. Help me, Greg.
Let's just throw it out there. Let's ask the person who asked that question if they would respond and let us know if you answered it. In the meantime, I have another question that's come up, which is what's the difference between first loop learning and second loop learning?
Given a situation, I address it. In the second loop, given a situation, I think about addressing it, and I also think about the manner in which I address it. There's a model that I called AIR, action. Hold on. So that I can actually take action with regard to a situation. I can improve the way that I take action, or I can rethink the whole idea of what it is that I'm trying to accomplish. And each one of these has an increased potential for impact on the result of our actions. Though at the same time, while it's possible that you could get 100% improvement in what this particular situation accomplishes, the question that you have to ask also is, can the organization tolerate that? I mean, there are situations where we could do this, though the organization simply can't tolerate anything more than a 15 or 20% improvement in the way that we go about doing things, because it'll just run them off the rails.
So wait, Gene, go back to that illustration for a second. So if you're talking about single loop learning, are you talking about B1? What are you actually, what is this illustration showing us about single loop learning versus double loop learning?
Well, given the current situation, I act to resolve the situation. I'm learning how to resolve the situation. On the improve loop, I'm learning how to better learn how to address the situation. And rethinking, which should be third loop, I'm actually rethinking about my thinking about my thinking. I know.
Got it. Thank you. That looks like it answered that question. We have other questions coming in. Gene, do you want to continue to take questions, or do you have any particular concept you'd like to? No,
this is the third segment. I would prefer to talk about. In other words, the next several weeks gets more and more intent from. It gets more systemically over time. So, you can see it in some of the discussions. There are participants in this program who are relatively new to the concept of systems thinking, and then there are those people that are part of this program that could host this program, and it's that's why you look at what's in the discussions, and they're all over the map.
Right. So I have a follow-up question and then a new topic. So is first and second loop learning the same as first and second order cybernetics?
If I recall, first order cybernetics looks at the interactions in the situation with me being outside of that model. And second order cybernetics, I actually include myself in the model because of the realization that any action that I take interjects me into the model itself, and so I should consider myself as part of the model. Now, cybernetics is not my strong suit, and that's just sort of my recollection.
So the next topic that people would like to talk about is, tell us a little bit about what a system is, the elements, the relationships, the boundaries. How do you know what to include in a system and what to exclude from a system?
You should, when you do, the purpose of a model is to promote understanding. Whether or not it's a good model depends upon the extent that it does that in terms of what's needed. And so I say that one has to include in the model all of the relevant interactions, though understanding what's relevant is oftentimes, I mean, some things are real easy to determine and some things are more difficult to determine, because the further away you get from the center, the more nebulous it becomes. And oftentimes you, when in doubt, include so that people know that it was considered, and then you can sort of leave it on the diagram and cross it off to say, well, we finally figured out that this really wasn't relevant. If you go back and look at the bird feeder, it started out with a very simple interaction in terms of how I perceived sitting watching the birds on the railing in the morning, and I decided to take action on that. If that could have been my model, simply situation response. And then all of the rest of it I learned about after the fact, after I already installed the birdhouse. And though if I stop to think about it, then I develop an understanding of all of these relations that are relevant to the action that I'm intending to take. Are what's in the model that I offered all of them? No. It's a perspective offered to be evolved on. I mean, if depending upon where you were in the world, and with an intention of installing a bird feeder, some of those elements and relations that are on that map might be totally irrelevant because those pieces or components don't happen in that part of the world. So there isn't a science to figuring out which things are relevant, though it's a trial and learning exercise between me and the model and other people who have perspectives on what I'm trying to understand. So I build the model, and you should approach it as an experiment in attempting to develop an understanding. And if you're really concerned about getting them right the first time, you're doing yourself a disservice because it's a trial and learn. I mean, there's a model for next week that I built 3 years ago and worked on it 2 or 3 times. And when I finally got to redo the story for it the other day, I realized there were a couple of the loops that I had messed up. So I had to rework it again. And then somebody sent me a message and told me I mislabeled one of the loops. So it's a process. If you start out and say the purpose of a model is to promote understanding, and if you approach it from that perspective, any model that you develop is better than no model at all. I mean, people send me these papers that are pages and pages long, and they talk about interactions, and there's no pictures. They drive me crazy. Anything more than a couple of interactions, and I'm lost without a picture. I don't know how they hold a sense of all of these interactions in their mind without a picture.
So, Gene, the next question that came up is, what's the difference between systems thinking and design thinking?
I don't have a clear answer for that.
Okay. And the person who wrote that answer, if you want to send me a little bit about what design thinking is and kind of the major characteristics of that, I will convey that to Gene, and we can come back to that question.
I will offer a thought. Okay. In Sengi, in the 5th discipline, he talks about a ship, and he asks about who has the greatest amount of control over that ship. You know, is it the captain, or is it the navigator, or is it the people in the engine room? And he finally gets down to saying the person who has the greatest control over the operation of that ship is the person that designed it. So that, and if you go back to look at a lot of Ackoff's work in interactive planning, you know, he talks about, instead of wrestling the solutions, you should simply design the problems out of existence, which makes a tremendous amount of sense. You know, when I find a rock that's too big to move, I dig a hole and let it fall in because of the force of gravity. So it's, I don't know, maybe that helps and maybe it doesn't, but that's the thought that came to mind.
Okay, so we'll see if that person comes back with any additional questions. We do have more questions coming in, so just bear with me. This one's kind of a long one. Okay, so this is talking a little bit about systems thinking, and the person says, I think in terms of core root problems using the Pareto or 80-20 principle where the majority of the results or outcomes come from a small number of causes. Systems thinking seems to me to be the most effective way to identify these prime issues or causes efficiently. To what extent do you agree?
Never confuse correlation with causality. Never, 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 never. It may be true and it may not be true. The trend does not predict the future. The set of interactions that produce the trend are what predicts the future. So while I identify something because of the data that I collected and I end up with a Pareto chart that tells me, all right, it is in fact the underlying model that I need to understand that is responsible for the data that I collected. And from a system dynamics perspective, what they do is they develop trends, which is the mode. I can't remember what they call it. Though, and then what they do is their intent is to develop a valid model which actually produces the reference mode. And if the model produces the reference mode, then there's a sense of reliance on the model itself, though you still can't absolutely be certain. Hopefully that helps.
And Gene, we have another question that's come in. Would you explain what was meant specifically by the difference between system thinking and system dynamics? Is one a subset of the other?
Okay, sorry. Some things connect in strange ways, and my wife tells me that nobody understands my humor but me. I initially came to the whole concept of systems thinking from Stafford Beer's Platform for Change in '76. It was a mind-altering experience that happened accidentally because somebody told me I had to read the book. And then over the years, you go in this direction and that direction, you end up working in lots of different sets of responsibilities. And then in 1990s, Senge released the Learning Fifth Discipline, and there was an article in Scientific American with this picture of a model developed in Stella, and I was absolutely hooked. And I spent a lot of time doing system dynamics. And I then thought that systems thinking was simply not a very grown-up version of system dynamics. I have since evolved my thoughts. Though from a U.S.-centric position, that is quite often the perspective, in that system dynamics is a true science, and systems thinking is sort of this kind of fuzzy, not too specific causal loop diagram stuff that people do that's not really very valid. Though from a broader European perspective, especially from the work of Flood and Jackson, systems thinking is all-encompassing. So that when we, maybe in week 2, I think, wait. Jackson's framework. Okay, where is it? Oh, there it is. All right. It bothered me greatly for many, many years that if why it was that there had to be so many models and methods that were called systems thinking. I mean, if systems thinking was systems thinking, why didn't we just all do system dynamics and leave it at that? And it wasn't until I came across Jackson's system of systems methodologies that gave me a reference model that made sense of why they all existed, in that he talks about systems either being simple or complex, and the participants involved as being unitary, pluralist, or coercive, and based upon the intersection of those, you end up with hard systems thinking as approaches that make sense in this particular context, though in this particular context there are different kinds of approaches that make sense. And the same thing for soft systems arena. And then in other words, you can't develop a system dynamics model to help you understand how to deal with the situation when all of the participants can't agree on what the problem is. Right? So it's depending upon, context is everything. So you first need to understand the arena within which you're trying to function to help you get a sense of how to understand what's happening in that arena. There's just not one size fits all. So that from my perspective now, all of this is systems thinking.
And what would be systems dynamics?
It's considered a dynamic systems approach for a situation where the system is complex. There are a bunch of interactions that are not constant. I mean, there's a difference between a clock and this set of interactions down here at the bottom. I mean, the clock has a small set of interactions that are constant over time. They're not changing. So that if you have a relatively simple, stable thing that you refer to as the system, you can do analysis and it serves you well. So that this whole thing about analysis and synthesis, I mean, they're two sides of a coin, and the two of them serve you well in different environments.
Gene, we just have about 4 minutes left, and I have a stream of questions that are in. I can't ask all of them, but I did want to highlight one of them because it affects everyone in the group. The question was, what specifically do I need to complete in order to achieve the certificate? So could you give us a quick punch list of what needs to be done in order to qualify for the certificate?
You need to convince me you understand the subject. That I've been, the end.
How do we do that?
I'm still writing the directions. You're going to have to write a short paper, not a tome. I mean, 3, 4, 5 pages that encompasses a model that you have developed. Whether it's qualitative or quantitative. I mean, it depends upon what the topic area is that you're trying to investigate. But you have to demonstrate an ability to identify a situation and look at it systemically and produce a set of thoughts as a result. What did you learn from endeavoring to address that situation from a systemic perspective?
Okay, we're just out of time. Would you like to have any closing thoughts or directions about preparation for next week?
I don't know. You going to show up? This was far better than Tuesday. Thank you very much, Greg.
You are very welcome.
And it was, I mean, from you perusing the questions, you must get a sense of what I was trying to deal with on Tuesday and perusing them myself and answer them. It was out of control. And I was wasting people's time, and it was inappropriate. So,
So for next week, what would you like people to keep top of mind or to prepare for?
well, go through the material, participate in the discussions. I mean, there are some people posting really good thoughts associated with the content that they're looking at. And if you have questions, in other words, I am monitoring the threads, and I respond to a number of them, and other people will respond to them also, so that posting your perspectives and asking questions in the threads is something that you really, really should do. Swimming is much more fun in the water.
Okay, thank you, Gene.
Well, thank you all, and I hope this was a meaningful get together. If now, there's been a change of plans based upon. I mean, this was initially put together as a 12-week program. So a lot of people said, well, I'd really like to attend, but I can't fit 12 consecutive weeks into my schedule because it just doesn't work that way. Things are constantly changing. And there were a lot of people that said, well, when are you going to offer this again? And when I told them 2015, they said that's absolutely unacceptable. So that we have figured out how to turn this into a recurring program so that a new version of it starts every week. So this week, people have been going through the systems thinking segment. There'll be some people starting on the Web of Wonder segment next week, and all of these sessions that have been scheduled for the initial launch of the program will still happen on those days at these times, but they're going to be scheduled differently, and so that when you get the email message that says all of your sessions have been canceled on GoToMeeting, don't worry about it, because what's going to happen is that you come to, oh, come on. You come to the office hours node 15 or 20 minutes before the session is supposed to start, and there's a link right here, and if you click that, it will take you right into the session so that they'll be scheduled, and the link will be posted 15 or 20 minutes before the session. You can click on it. No need to register ahead of time. And this is the schedule to check, because all of the ones that are on the main page are here, though I'm adding additional sessions in the future to accommodate the new programs that are starting on a weekly basis. And I will continue to schedule additional sessions to the extent warranted to respond to the questions that people have. The intent is to support people better understanding systems thinking and the implications of that. So, okay. Well, take care all, and we'll see you next week. Bye.